Hello everyone and welcome to this Partnerships in Clinical Trials webinar. Sorry for the slightly late start. I'm your host Andy and I'll be shortly passing over to our chair and panellists from Ataxia UK and they'll be talking about involving patients and patient groups in clinical research. We'll be going through a few questions and answers after each panelist finishes. So if you do have any questions, if you could please just type them into the box provided whilst they are speaking, and then I'll ask them at the end of each panelist. So with that, I'll pass over to the presenters.
Hello everybody, so I'm Julie Greenfield. I'm Ataxia UK's research manager and I'll be chairing this webinar today. So first of all, thank you very much to the organisers of the Partnership in Clinical Trials conference for enabling us to do this webinar. And we're hoping to sort of discuss some of the partnerships between patients, patient groups and researchers, and hopefully it will lead to an interesting discussion. We've invited 4 speakers, 2 people from Ataxia UK, a patient and a researcher. So we're going to start off with Sue Millman, who's the CEO of Ataxia UK, who will give a short presentation sort of highlighting the role of patients in what all the charity does, and then we'll move on to the next speakers after that.
Good afternoon everybody. Well, first of all, I thought that I should say something about the ataxias, although I'm anticipating that most people joining us will know something about the ataxias. The ataxias are a set of degenerative, often life-limiting neurological conditions which produce problems with movement, balance and speech. We don't know exactly how many people in the UK are affected, but based on a population study we did some years ago, we believe that there are about 10,000 adults. Our estimate is that there are 1,200 children affected, but again, nobody knows properly. We've attempted to survey neurologists without success. The ataxias can be, or an ataxia can be, either genetic or idiopathic or acquired through an accident or some sort of bodily trauma. The symptoms can be constant or they can be episodic, coming now and again. In all instances, it tends to be a degenerative condition. We've done a lot of work on discovering genes, and Andrea Nemeth will be talking from her position as an expert geneticist in ataxia a little later. And so far we have found around 100 different types of genetic ataxia. There are a few types of ataxia which start in childhood or in teenage. Many others are late onset, and even those which do begin in childhood or teenage can exceptionally be late onset. The most common ataxia in the UK is Friedreich's ataxia, where we believe that there are around 1,200 adults affected. Ataxia UK is working to find, in collaboration with our researchers, a cure for 1 or more ataxias by the year 2020, and we still believe that this is possible. So about Ataxia UK, the charity. Well, I'll start at the bottom of this list and say that we provide support to people affected by ataxia, both patients and families and carers of patients. We offer a helpline, numerous information publications, information on our website, and opportunities for patients to meet, both at conferences and through our branches and support groups, which number about 55 at the moment across the UK. One of the things which our the members of Ataxia UK have been very keen to see us do is to raise awareness of ataxia. Some years ago we did our first market research and found that about 7.5% of the population know what it is. More recently, about 18 months ago, we did some more market research and we've taken it to nearly 10%. Maybe not all our efforts, but we believe that what we have done has certainly contributed to raising awareness. We also aim to improve the treatment and care that people with ataxia get, and we seed fund research, and I will talk about these two in slightly more depth. So first of all, research funding, and you can see that the amount that we are able to inject into research goes up and down according to the amount of money that the organisation is able to raise. You will also see an example of our collaboration upon this slide, because you can see that the bits in green are projects where we have co-funded with another organisation, and also the bits in red are also co-funded and where we have also administered the grant. So you can see that there are some quite considerable amounts of funding going in to research, although one has to say in the context of research this is but a drop in the ocean. However, the years that you are looking at, there's nearly £1.75 million worth of investment, and the collaborations that we've engaged in has meant that 40% of that has come from co-funding. This co-funding comes from ataxia charities across the world. We work very much in concert with the 17 charities of Ataxia, which is the alliance of patient groups dealing with ataxia across Europe. And we also work in partnership with Friedreich's Ataxia Research Association, pharma, in the United States, and the National Ataxia Foundation, as well as pharma Australia. So some well-developed networking there, which is contributing to the ability to us, for all of us, to be more joined up in our approaches to research. Looking at treatment and care, in 2003 we did a survey of our members, and one of the foremost things that that survey showed to us was that people had poor access to ataxia specialists of any sort, be they geneticists, neurologists, speech therapists or physiotherapists. And in general, the services they were receiving were not very joined up. So in response to the clear need enunciated by members of Ataxia UK, we decided to launch on a strategy of establishing specialist ataxia clinics within our National Health Service. And the features of these are that there is an expert neurologist or geneticist, that they should undertake research, and that there should be a specialist nurse to enable the service to be more joined up than simply an appointment with a neurologist. So 13 years later, there are now 4 specialist clinics in London, Sheffield, Newcastle, and in Oxford. And these clinics, some of them have been able to establish multidisciplinary clinics, which mean that people are assessed in a holistic manner, not only by the neurologist and the specialist nurse, but perhaps by speech therapists, occupational therapists, and physiotherapists. And the feedback that we have had on all the centres without exception is that they are very, very popular with the patients. So 2017, we need to introduce a new strategic plan because our current strategic plan is running out. And we wanted to ask ourselves the questions which are on the screen. Who are our stakeholders and what do they think? Are we putting patients at the centre of all we do? Is the Ataxia UK addressing the right challenges? And are we setting the right priorities? And also, what does the wider landscape tell us about the environment and climate in which we are operating in? As a first step to assembling this strategic plan, given that we want to put patients and people affected by ataxia at the centre of all we do, we launched a survey of our friends, members of Ataxia UK. And over the summer we sent the survey to 4,500 households, and we got 436 responses. In the main, those responses were from people with ataxia. Just 15% of the responses came from carers. That was slightly disappointing because we wanted to have a response in the round from everybody, but on the other hand, the information from the survey is going to keep us busy for many months to come. 69% of people had cerebellar ataxia that responded to the survey, and 15% of people with Friedreich's ataxia. And that's actually not far off the estimate that we believe of the prevalence of Friedreich's and the other ataxias. So that was a good bit of confirmation. So we asked people about their health problems, and this is just a snapshot of some of the responses that they gave. There were not that many surprises in terms of the actual symptoms that people display. It is not surprising, given that people have ataxia, that there should be problems with balance and walking and clumsiness and falling. And we also know that slurred speech and dysarthria is common among people with ataxia. But I think that we were surprised at the percentages that we found when we examined them. Because, for example, 87% of people with FA had problems with slurred speech and dysarthria, and 73% in total, covering all of the ataxias. So to us, those percentages seemed pretty high. We encounter people with ataxia very often, and certainly we didn't have the feeling that pronounced problems existed in that higher percentage. But this is a survey taken from the patient's point of view. So obviously patients are telling us that this is a bigger problem than we presumed it had been, used to presume it was. The other figures that are highlighted in red are also surprising to us, not because of the symptoms themselves, but because of the prevalence of the symptoms. And what this survey in this area will assist us to do is to target our research and our services towards these issues, which we have not currently given any highlighting to. For example, we believe that what we should be doing is forming links with charities that deal with bladder problems. We can be pointing our members to information that they have, and we can also be discussing with them whether there is whether there are possibilities of doing joint research. And similarly with the coughing and choking issues and the fatigue. We asked people what was the impact of ataxia upon them, and we found that we found here the enormity of the problems that people face with ataxia. It is not simply a question of dealing with the physical problems. Ataxia is an all-encompassing condition which makes people fearful about the future, and makes it difficult to cope with the exhaustion and fatigue which accompanies us, and also produces isolation and depression. And clearly this is also going to figure in our approach towards services and research in the future. Coming on to treatment and care, what we find is that the number of people using specialist ataxia clinics is roughly just over a third, and when we have totted up how many people we believe in total are being carried as cases by ataxia clinics, that also comes to around about a third. So we feel that there's some good validation of the research there, of the survey rather. What we think is also significant is the fact that in a number of areas the demand for services roughly exceeds the services provided by about 50%. And this is quite a significant figure, and it encourages us to think that we should be creating at least 1 or 2 more ataxia centres, specifically in areas where people are unable to travel from, where they are more remote from the current ataxia centres. So what are people's priorities? Well, very clearly, people's priorities, we asked people to name their top 4 priorities, and they're shown here with a weighting on the graph according to whether they were somebody's highest or lowest priority. And very clearly, supporting scientific and medical research comes out as people's top priority. And in the context of us being an organisation which funds research and wishes to engage people in that research, we find this very confirmatory of the path on which we are placed. And we believe it also indicates that when approached, people will be keen to get involved in research projects, and indeed we have found this in the past. So Ataxia UK has the very clear aim and vision of achieving a cure for 1 or more of the ataxias by 2020. And as I said, the developments in research at the moment indicate to us that while there may not be something on the shelves, we are making sufficient progress to hope that there will be something discovered by 2020 that will alleviate people's symptoms of 1 or more of the ataxias, and will assist us to further our objectives of putting patients at the centre. Thank you, everybody. I don't know if you have any questions relating to my presentation, but I'm very happy to take them now.
The first one, what is the ratio in research for Friedrich's and dominant?
Okay, so at the present we are funding, 50% of the projects that we are funding are cerebellar ataxias, and 50% of the projects we are funding are Friedrich's ataxias. And we are very careful to make sure that there is a balance of projects, not between Friedrich's and dominant, because there are some recessive ataxias which are not Friedrich's, but between Friedrich's and everything else. However, it is the case that many of our more wealthy donors and many of our more active fundraisers actually designate their funds for ataxia research, for Friedrich's research, and consequently we find that we often have more Friedrich's money to invest, simply because that's how the donors have dictated it.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more question, and it's about is basically someone attends a clinic more local to her than travelling to London, and is there a way to have a ataxia nurse at these consultations?
No, I'm afraid that the ataxia nurses, what happens when we're establishing an ataxia centre is that we pay for the nurse for a couple of years while the ataxia centre builds up the caseload. And after that period, when we've managed to prove to the NHS that there is a need for the clinic, then the NHS takes over the funding of it. So unfortunately, we're not able to send our ataxia nurses around the country. And indeed, in fact, at a couple of the clinics, the ataxia nurses are very much funded by research money, and so they are there and present at the clinics, but they're actually funded to participate in the research primarily. And I should have focused a little bit more on how much research is done at the ataxia clinics. We do insist that for a clinic to be established, there should be research undertaken, because they are going to establish a large cohort of patients at the clinic, and it would be a terrible waste not to undertake research in those circumstances.
Lovely. So shall we move on to the next speaker? So the next speaker is Richard Brown, who has ataxia himself, and he's also a trustee of Ataxia UK, has worked as a trustee. So Richard, would you like to start telling us a little bit about yourself and the diagnosis?
Yes. Can everyone hear me? My name's Richard Brown. I was diagnosed when I was 15. I'm 40 now, so that was 25 years ago. I started noticing general fatigue and tiredness when I was at school, and after a lot of head scratching and quite a few tests, we went to Oxford, and I had some tests, and I was told I had Friedreich's ataxia.
Thank you. And so can you tell us a little bit about how you learn about research, how you keep yourself informed, and in particular how that helps you in your role as a trustee of Ataxia UK?
Yes, well, the ataxia, I came to ataxia quite late. It was only really when I retired 5 years ago that I sort of became involved in charity more, but I'm aware of there's a very powerful community on Facebook, and also online on a website called Health Unlocked. There's a lot of experts and very knowledgeable people with sort of information they share about ataxia. That's very helpful. Being a trustee for me was another good way of finding out in the board papers how research. There was somebody else telling you about research, and the trustees actually did follow the recommendations that are given to them by medical advisors, but do get to sort of hear about research first and direct which research Ataxia UK is going to support. So it was very useful for me as a trustee to be able to learn about the research and who was doing it and where it was being done and how had it involved patients or so that's very good. The website's very good. That's lots of information. I have a copy of the clinical guidelines which Ataxia UK produce, which is a document intended for medical practitioners, and I always say that to patients like myself that because ataxia is so little known, you have no choice but to become an expert in it yourself and a practitioner yourself, and so the information the charity gives in the guidelines is really helpful to all of us, sort of battling with ataxia.
Thank you, yes. And moving on to the more sort of research and clinical side, I understand that you've attended the Oxford Ataxia Clinic. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience there, why you decided to attend, and also if you've been involved in any research studies at all?
Yes, well, I came to Ataxia quite late, not having had much contact with medical experts throughout the sort of first 20 years of my condition, and as a trustee I was doing a lot of visits to branches and groups in the Midlands, and I felt that I had to go to a nearby centre because there was so much talk of them, and at a conference every year there's a big thing about the clinics and people always talk about them. So I wanted to go along and see, how the clinic would integrate into my experience of ataxia, and so that was really, I didn't have a particular sort of issue that I wanted to talk about, but I went along and I met Dr. Nemeth, and it was last year, and I would say that it was generally one of the first times in my life that I'd had a conversation with the medical practitioner who I didn't have to explain exactly everything about my condition and how I was feeling and what I was struggling with. Dr. Nemeth, being an expert in ataxia, already knew It was such an easy conversation to have, and the ataxia nurse that was there was wonderful and practical, and the same level of knowledge and understanding. It really made a big difference to me. The best thing I think about the actual visit was that the local branch, the Oxford branch, had established a kind of presence there. So after your consultation, you'd which often, I mean, can be quite devastating to go from feeling a bit tired and not quite understanding why, to finding out you have this massive condition. It was really nice to actually go and meet the other people in the branch, sit with them. They talk to you, offer you support, and for me it was a real sort of holistic approach to. In one day you would get the opportunity to ask all the detailed medical questions that you need, and then straight afterwards you get the chance to get all the support you'd need from the members of the group. So it was really good. Research for me, I keep saying I came to Ataxia quite late, and I sort of felt that a typical research requires patients of younger age than I. Although I know that, I realise that isn't always true, but it is. So I haven't actually participated in many. I've sort of signed up for a few, and I've talked to people and given them my details, and there was a Dr. MS clinic. There was I did that and signed up for a trial, some work she was doing. But I do know people who have done the trials, and they feel they're very important. They can't do very much, and that ataxia can be very disempowering. And I think that people, especially younger people, they feel that they're actually doing something. They're making a difference in the struggle, and they're helping other people by so they're very popular, and very well done, I think, as well, the research.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, it's really reassuring to hear that that attending the clinic, the specialist clinic, was beneficial to you. Certainly, it's something that we hear a lot. And also, as you mentioned, the Ataxia UK volunteer scheme, that was quite a novel thing that we established at the first clinic in London a number of years ago, and is really, as you said, a very holistic way of engaging with patients and patients groups actually after the clinic appointment. So it's, when people are just has seen the specialist, I think, as you say, it's quite nice to then be able to engage with the charity immediately and sort of start up a conversation at that early stage. So thank you so much for sharing all that with us, Richard. Have we got any questions at all before we move on to the next speaker?
So not so much, well, yes, it is a question. Basically, someone saying, very interesting to listen to Richard, and I can empathise. And I would just add that can we contribute towards meaningful statistics as well? Agreed?
Towards, sorry?
Meaningful statistics. Sorry, I'll read it. So this is someone who also suffers from ataxia saying, interesting to listen to Richard, and I empathise. I would just add that we contribute towards meaningful statistics. Agreed?
Yes.
Yes. So Richard, yes. So asking us if we agree with the fact that being part of research, you contribute a lot to meaningful statistics.
Yes, it's very valuable to I mean, the actual research needs people to volunteer, and it's a very important thing to do. And it's, like I said before, it's one of the things that you can do to kind of fight against ataxia and help people and help other people with it. So it's a very meaningful and very worthwhile thing to do. And there's links to it on the Ataxia website I'd recommend, that anyone can look on there or talk to their nearest centre or clinic and find out what research is taking place or what's recruiting volunteers. And there is a database as well that you can join, and I believe it's held by Ataxia UK, and you sort of enter your details in there, and it's kept.
Yes, as a register for trials and for research studies. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So I think maybe we should move on to the next speaker.
We do have one more question if we have.
Okay.
Just a quick answer. Have you considered, Richard, ever offering your experience to inform the types of research that is needed, i.e. what the research question should be?
I spent 4 years as a trustee and inputting into that kind of strategic direction of the charity. And again, which I recommend, anyone can, get involved in the charity that way and help out. I'm as a person, I'm very interested in the social aspect of the disability. So that's more the direction I've taken. But I did, join up as a trustee and was able to get involved that way.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next speaker is Dr. Julie Valortigara, who's Ataxia UK's research officer, and she will actually also be a speaker at the Partnerships in Clinical Trials conference that will be taking place in November. Julie, so if you'd like to sort of tell us a little bit about some examples of how patient groups, so how Ataxia UK engages patients in the research process and how you think that might be beneficial.
Yeah, sure. So here at Ataxia UK we engage patients in the research process at different stages. So maybe the first example I'd like to talk about is the Scientific Advisory Committee that we have here. With members, scientific members, but also lay members taking part in discussion to review and rank grant applications that we receive. We meet 3 times a year, and then from this committee, recommendations are made to the trustee board that Richard mentioned, and then the trustees make the final decision about the project that we should be funding. So we invite lay members to take part to our Scientific Advisory Committee, to take part in the process of grant selection. Here we have patient voice in discussion about the design of studies at the preliminary stage when we receive preliminary application, but also at the full application stage. We also thank our lay members to take part and to take initiatives. In this committee, one of our lay members submitted a scoring system to help the committee to rank the full preliminary applications, because we received quite a lot at each round. So this system is now being implemented and we're using it. It's also very important for us to hear from these members about the feasibility of some functional studies when we receive studies using a physiotherapy approach or functional approach to assess the symptoms, or develop new assessment tools. Obviously, lay members who are people living with the condition are in the best position to tell the committee if this test is feasible in the first place before we even think about funding this study. So I think Ataxia UK is really engaging patients in this crucial stage of funding research and relevant research to make progress and to find new treatments. I think we're making also science accessible to lay members, but also to people living with the condition by asking lay summaries in the project we receive. We put these lay summaries when we fund research on our website. We send papers to our members of the committee in advance, and then if any question or discussion is needed before the meeting, we make ourselves available to do so. So I think this is a crucial patient engagement there. I think there is another way, obviously, to engage patients in crucial steps of research. It's to engage in research studies by running workshops and groups of discussion with people living with a condition who have an interest in the research and wants to make the difference and get their voice heard in order to design new clinical studies that will be more adapted to people living with the condition. So looking at trial design, clinical study design, we run a workshop of that kind. We also consult people living with the condition to review some patient information sheets or leaflets that we have, that we distribute to our members as well as the general public, or we put it live on our websites. Obviously, we help enrollment to participants to clinical studies, to the one that we fund that we are involved in, but also the one that we don't fund, because we want to collaborate and play an important role in an international community of clinical studies run by different pharmaceutical companies and different organizations worldwide. So we help recruitment when a new study opens, and then if we can get at this stage the patient voice heard and maybe slightly change the study design, that will guarantee the patient will take part in the study and last the whole time of the study and being really engaged and feeling this is a useful study to take part on, then we also play this role, and the patient have a very important role to play in this particular example of clinical research. And finally, this has been already mentioned, we have a patient registry. So we publicize recruitment to clinical studies on our website, but also it happens that we do targeted emails to recruit participants to study opening. So I think that kind of answers and give a bit of example of what we do and how it's important to give the patient role and patient voice in different stages of the research process.
Yeah, thank you. And in terms of, so this is very much sort of involving patients in the research process, both in funding and sort of helping us with the design and things. So are there other things in terms of other partnerships? So the partnerships that Ataxia UK might have with researchers, and sort of, would you like to explain a bit more about those partnerships?
Yes, I think it's important to cover this point and to see how patient groups such as Ataxia UK and others can really help the research process by fostering collaboration and developing partnerships to work together. So I think patient groups such as Ataxia UK have great knowledge and understanding of the condition that we're working on, and this is this expertise that we have, and we're happy to share and to engage with various partners playing a key role in clinical research. This is something very valuable, and we can play a very important role as a partner to develop new clinical research that will be relevant and will make a difference for patients in the near future. So we have a great network of researchers and clinicians who have the expertise in ataxia, and also they have an interest in working on this condition. And we work closely with this registry of researchers and clinicians, and also, as I said before, we have access to patient registries. So I think for me it's quite obvious that patient groups can really help to foster collaborations and promote research widely, and it should be a key partner and not left aside but invited to discuss future clinical research. I mean, as an example to highlight what I've just said is Ataxia UK has organized last year, in partnership with 3 other patient groups, the largest international research conference on ataxia ever organized, where a community of 350 researchers, clinicians, and pharmaceutical companies gathered to talk about research progress, about future clinical trials, and they also got the opportunity to meet patients at this conference. As an outcome of this event, the majority of delegates who attended this great conference said in their feedback that this event was very useful for advancing their work, and rated the scientific content of the conference as being outstanding, and also believed that they made crucial new contacts at this conference that will enhance their work. So again, seeing patient groups being able to organize an event of that scale, where new clinical trials were announced and many more collaborations were set up. It's also an example of how we can achieve and how we could work with other partners in clinical research.
Thank you. Yes, that's excellent. Have we got any questions on this sort of aspect of research engagement from the charity?
We do, yes. We have one question. How do you train your lay members to be useful members of the Scientific Advisory Board?
That's a very good question. Thank you. So how do we train them? So first of all, when they get in touch with us as expressing an interest in research and taking part of this committee. So we have a discussion with them about how the committee is run, what happens during these meetings. We ask them to send a CV and a cover letter that can express their enthusiasm, interest, any particular maybe skill they may have from their CV that could be also very useful to take part in committee discussion. As I said before, to be a lay member, this person has to have the condition or be really a relative or somebody living close to somebody who has the condition, to also have this personal engagement with the condition and to help the charity to run this research program in the best way. And then when the committee meets again, then we look at CVs and cover letters and we discuss the potential different candidates. And it's an open discussion, and we obviously welcome people to take part of the committee, enthusiasm, and at the moment, we actually have a quite high number of lay members. We have 4 people part of the committee and around 10 scientists. And I think in terms of training, it really is like about commitment to read papers before meeting, to ensure that they understand what the project is about. Obviously, the lay summary is made for them, to understand the challenge of the project. So making this summary lay, when we ask researchers to submit a grant application to us, they have to write a summary in lay terms, and this summary has to be understood by somebody who doesn't have a research background. So obviously we ensure that lay members are able to understand the topic of the research, the challenges, but also the difficulties of that project, and to be able to take part of the discussion on the day of the committee. So I think I'm more or less answered the question. Maybe Julie wants to add something, or?
Yeah, so the other thing is that because we have a research officer and a research manager in the Ataxia UK office, lay members can discuss with us projects in advance of the meeting if they find that something's not very clear. As Julie said, the lay summary is really crucial. And we do find that sort of different people have different perspectives to add. So, you know, even looking at the grant application and some of the implications and sort of seeing whether it's something that could actually be useful in the long term. So looking at the project from those eyes, that perspective, I think, is very important. It's something that standing back as a layperson, as a patient, is something maybe you're looking more into a project rather than maybe some of the scientific members who might be looking in more depth at the science. But yes, I think in terms of training, having the opportunity to talk to us and be trained on the job in a way as you go along each meeting is also something that hopefully people would find useful. Was there anything else at all that anybody wanted to add? Otherwise we can pass on to the next speaker.
There was, yes, one more question. Is Ataxia UK also involved in fundamental research?
Yes, we are. It's a very good question. Obviously, today we're trying to highlight engagement in clinical research as part of the topic of this conference coming up in November. But we are engaged in fundamental research. In fact, our research strategy covers a spectrum of research projects aiming to improve the diagnosis of the different types of ataxias, as well as developing new cell or animal models of the different types of ataxia which allow researchers to use these models to make progress and identify new molecules or new targets that could be used for research and development for new treatments. So we are very much interested in understanding the mechanism, the molecular mechanisms, or the genetics, genetic hallmarks or mutations or new mechanism involved in different types of ataxias that we don't know very much of, because I mean, as we said, pre-Drax ataxia is the most common form of ataxia that has been quite well researched, but there's many other types of ataxia that are much rarer than this one that's been under-researched, and there's very little known about them. And as long as we don't know much about the mechanism of how the disease is developed and how it leads to these different symptoms that people experience when they live with the condition, then it's very hard to develop new treatments because we know very little about it. So Ataxia UK has a very ambitious research strategy to cover fundamental research as well as preclinical studies and clinical studies, aiming to look at improving the diagnosis, developing new treatments, but also alleviating symptoms by developing new therapies.
Thank you. So I think we better move on to the last speaker. So Andrea, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the specialist ataxia clinic in Oxford that was established, as Sue said at the start, in partnership with Ataxia UK, and maybe tell us a bit about the clinic and how that helps you in research.
Okay, so we run one of the ataxia clinics in the UK. As you've already heard, it has a number of clinicians, nursing staff, and volunteers. And I think that the relationship between the patients coming into the clinic, seeing our staff, and also having a close interaction with Ataxia UK is really absolutely essential to the research process. So there are numerous components to this. Obviously, research comes in many different forms, as you've already heard. It may be basic laboratory research, for example, trying to find some of the new genes that cause ataxia that we don't yet know about. Once we find these, we can then feed them into the diagnostic process, which shortens the time that patients may need to come and be investigated. We have received a lot of funding from Ataxia UK to improve the diagnostic pathway very dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. It also means collecting cohorts of patients, and this is absolutely critical for clinical trials and natural history studies. Finally, it's important for seeing patients for actual clinical trials. And so the patients themselves, when they come to the clinic, may also be involved in Ataxia UK, and so we may make them aware of various studies, but if they aren't aware of them, then they may be able to find out about them through newsletters, which are really, really important. And if we're going to think about the long term of clinical trial, then what you need to be aware of is that when you get to the point of clinical trial, you have to, sorry, I'm just turning the phone off. You have to have a very rapid recruitment phase. So pharma companies want us to be able to recruit very quickly. So even if you're not involved in a research study or a clinical trial at the time of the initial consultation, and it may seem like a few years, maintaining contact with the clinic is absolutely essential, because we then have an idea about how many patients are out there with a specific genetic diagnosis, for example, that we can then very quickly recruit into clinical trials. The other really important thing at the moment, which some of you will be aware of, is that many of the ataxias, genetic ataxias, are incredibly rare. And so if we only have one patient, it's very difficult to know whether we've actually found the specific cause. And this is where collaboration with lots of other teams is really important. So we've recently identified from one of our patients a new gene causing a dominant ataxia, and after contacting the group in London, we found another case, and this is a particularly interesting gene because we think that it may be amenable to new pharmacological treatments, and so we're hoping that we're going to be able to design research experiments around that. And so all of these different strands between the patients, Ataxia UK, and the clinicians all coming together within the clinical environment really move forward the research in a very fundamental way. And I think anybody who's been involved in any of the clinics in the UK will probably have experienced that in one way or another.
Thank you. Yes, that's very true. I think definitely something very valued. And in terms of, so thank you for highlighting all about the different research studies and that are so essential and can take place at the clinic. Another sort of partnership that we had with Ataxia UK was to do with the production of the medical guidelines. Can you say a bit more about that, maybe?
Sorry, I didn't catch that. The telephone is very poor. Could you just repeat that?
So I was just talking about whether you want to say something about the medical guidelines and our partnership with Ataxia UK and your help in that.
Yeah. So this was this is a quite a long-term project that has been going for a number of years, and it's really been very, very important in highlighting the way that patients with ataxia should come through clinical services, because they may present to a wide variety of clinicians, either pediatricians initially or adult neurologists. They may come directly through genetics if there is a known family history. They may see orthopedic surgeons or be identified by a cardiac clinic. So there's a lot of ways that patients initially present to the clinical services. And if they don't find their way to an ataxia clinic immediately, then there needs to be a lot of help and support for the relevant clinicians on how to start to investigate the patient, what kind of blood tests need to be done, so metabolic tests, what kind of genetic tests need to be done, what kind of imaging is required, whether there are more invasive tests, which we are trying to reduce with the other types of tests nowadays, so particularly genetics, but sometimes more invasive tests like skin biopsies or lumbar punctures are required, and get the patient to a clinician who knows enough about the condition to be able to start to manage this. And one of the keys of the ataxia clinics is not that we can provide specific expertise in every single area. So I know a lot about ataxia, but I'm not a cardiologist or an orthopedic surgeon, for example, but we know the right cardiologist to send the patients to. And so the guidelines are really there to try and draw this all together and help clinicians, particularly in areas where there aren't specific ataxia clinics, to try and draw together the relevant services and highlight first of all, what investigations are required, and once a diagnosis is made, what kind of support the patients need. And one of the really useful things may be, first of all, that clinicians themselves can go to their relevant trusts and say, you know, I've read these guidelines. It's really important that I get some more access to specific services. Or it may actually be that the patients
can go along to those clinicians and say, listen, I've got this condition. I know it's not very common, so you may not have seen a case like this, but here are the guidelines. Could you assist me in getting to the relevant people? And that's actually really fundamentally important, because at the moment there are only 4 ataxia centres in the UK, and obviously that means that there are patients who live many, many, many hundreds of miles from these clinics and still can't access them. And of course the ultimate goal is that we can provide more clinics, more expertise throughout the UK, but at the moment, realistically, with the health services as they are, it is not always possible. And so the guidelines are really there to assist the patients and the clinicians in getting the right services. I should also say, actually, that these guidelines are so good that they aren't just used in the UK, they are actually used worldwide, because they have so many excellent references to help clinicians look up specific pieces of information. They have very good summaries, for example, of different types of genetic conditions. So if you're scratching your head about what type of testing to do and where to access it, the genetic testing will help you with that. Really important highlighting speech therapy and physiotherapy and so on. So they're very comprehensive guidelines, and they're really a kind of management textbook, if you like, that are used worldwide.
Thank you, Andrea. Andy, have we got any questions after the speaker?
Yes, we do. We have. We'll have to go quite quickly because we're obviously running a little late. But so, firstly, a big question: will Brexit affect the future funding or focus of Ataxia UK research?
Well, if you're asking me that, obviously Ataxia UK may have some information on that. I think there is concern about how international funding collaborations are going to work to their optimum, particularly as the European Union has provided directly or indirectly quite a lot of research. And certainly many of the universities are extremely concerned about this. I think that we as a group, one of the advantages of working closely together is that we will be able to lobby the government to highlight to them if there are going to be gaps in the funding that we need to fill in other ways.
Yes, I mean, just to add to that, there were a lot of anecdotal stories of British laboratories being asked to withdraw from applications to Europe immediately after the Brexit vote. There was quite a lot of pressure put on the government, and in response what they announced was that they would pick up any funding for British laboratories were they to enter into Horizon 2020 bids and for us subsequently to leave the EU. So in other words, British laboratories can join in partnership bids, and beyond Brexit the government will then meet those costs. So we hope that that has stopped the rot. But there is a great deal of concern, and there is also a degree of uncertainty and insecurity perhaps amongst those foreign staff of British research laboratories. So people who've come from Europe, and there are a lot of them working in British laboratories, who maybe are starting to feel a little insecure. And we hope that the government will pretty soon offer some reassurance about not asking people to leave who are already working here, and enable the work to continue unimpeded.
Okay, and one final question is what guidelines would you have for other patient groups about how to develop the relationship with or work with commercial companies developing clinical trials?
If that's directed, again, it's directed at me, I would suggest that it is all patient groups for whatever condition it is, and ataxia is the one we're particularly interested in, should maintain communication with both the clinicians and with Ataxia UK or the other charities that are supporting them. As I said, one of the absolutely fundamental factors for pharma companies, for example, who want to fund this, is that they know that there are large enough groups of patients out there who are willing to participate, that when it comes to recruitment, that there are enough patients to recruit quickly, because pharma companies have to pay vast amounts of money from the day that a study opens. And if recruitment is very slow, then they have to essentially waste an awful lot of money. And that is a major concern for them. And if you look at other conditions which have been very successful, so the one I've been involved in is Huntington's disease, one of the things that we worked very hard to do was to ensure that we had a close communication with patients, so that on the day that we needed to click and say, yes, we are open for recruitment, we already had patients lined up and ready to go. And although, as I said before, I appreciate that for many patients it can be difficult to attend clinic, it's absolutely essential that we know that they are out there. And so if we don't see them, and if we can't contact them via Ataxia UK, then we don't have strong enough recruitment to persuade the pharma companies to invest in this, even though it's a very worthwhile cause. So maintaining contact with us is absolutely essential.
So I think that Andrea's advice is really good advice to other patient groups. We have to make ourselves invaluable to the pharma and to the researchers. We have to make sure that pharma understand and researchers understand that they need patient groups. That means raising our profile as much as possible. It means having information readily at our disposal to be able to provide them with briefings about the condition, with, as Andrea says, the numbers of patients that they need for trials. We need to establish our credibility with them. And one of the other things I think that has helped establish Ataxia UK's credibility and the credibility of ataxia research in general is the highly developed links there are between the ataxia charities worldwide. We speak to our colleagues in America and across Europe at least once a month, and very often more often than that. And we need to model the collaborative behaviours with our patients and researchers that we expect farmers to demonstrate. And what we have found is that as we have got nearer finding things to take to market, then the farmers have become more interested and have wanted to become engaged with us, because they see us as crucial partners in that road.